starting recording. Okay, so we are now...
Julia, Lacey also agreed to take the RISE worksheets for us.
Thank you. So everybody email your RISE feedback to Lacey. Thank you, thank you. Okay, so let's move to group 4. That's Joanne, Myra, Hannah, Denise, and Jill.
Okay, so I'm going to share or attempt to share our handout. Okay. Does everybody see that? Did that work? Okay. So our group was the Latinx population, and the members of our group are Denise, Hannah, myself, Myra, and Jill. We each had a varying interest, and we came from different backgrounds. Some of us were personally affected. Other of us worked within the Latino community. So we all had varying interests. We finally decided on doing the Latinx community and post-secondary education. And we narrowed that down to how can Latinx youth maximize post-secondary educational persistence and completion in Buena Vista County, Iowa. So our geographical location is BV County. And then our youth population, it's a little broad because it is post-secondary education. So we did 18 and 30. As far as defining the issue, so we noticed, because of our backgrounds, we noticed that there was a difference in the Latinos who were persisting in completing post-secondary education as opposed to other ethnicities and races. And so we were interested in figuring out why that is. Is that a thing, or is that just something that we had seen? So we decided to do that issue. We believe that it's a social justice issue because everyone deserves equal opportunity to succeed and to complete their post-secondary education. So we felt that it was social justice. Another reason, and a lot of our readings talked about education as a gateway or as a stepping stone into the middle class. And so being able to move from poverty into the middle class is also a necessity for people. So we felt that to have equal opportunity to that is really important. This project identifies the access to and the ability to persist and complete post-secondary education as a vital resource for social mobility, and it's not equally available to all people. If this problem were solved, then people of all races, all people, regardless of their race, their socioeconomic background, their ethnicity, or their documentation status, would be equally represented when it came to educational attainment. And then Hannah is going to talk to us about our secondary data.
Okay, so in 2013, we have data from the 2013, 2015, and on census. In Buena Vista County, 24.8% of the population is Latinx. 21% of the overall population in BV County are Spanish speakers. And then coming down to Latinx students, almost half of Latinx students attend public 2-year colleges instead of traditional 4-year college programs because they're framed as cheaper and faster options, even though the majority of them actually aspire to earn a bachelor's degree. Overall, only about 2 in 10 Latinx go on to earn bachelor's degrees, compared to 1 in 3 African Americans and 45% of white students. So, Latinx enrollment in 2 and 4-year colleges has increased in the past decade. However, Latinx students in 4-year colleges still lag behind all other racial and ethnic groups in degree completion. So only 15% of Latinx students earn their bachelor's degrees, compared to 63% of Asians, 41% of whites, and 22% of African Americans. So like what Joanne was saying, is this leaves Latinx youth in the middle tier of education attainment, and it disproportionately funnels them into middle skill, sub-baccalaureate labor jobs, essentially. Latinx youth considering college tend to be reluctant to accumulate student loan debt, and they may feel more pressure to support their families by working and staying close to home. Cost, of course, is a major concern, as is familiarity with the U.S. education system and the English language. Many students are unable to rely on their parents for support during the process of applying and going through college or another type of post-secondary education. And at times they may fear that a lot of the questions asked in like the FAFSA may reflect negatively on their legal status, and there may be other negative consequences that arise from that, and so they're unable to get financial aid. So I'm going to pass it on over to Denise, who's going to talk about what's being done.
Thank you. For what the summary that we find with the keynote informants interviews, we did several interviews with the B current students to school professionals and some, like I said, students who benefit from these programs. We find out that there's, the schools are doing a lot of the increasing of the FAFSA, Pell Grants, and a specific scholarship for Latinx, college visits, like the TRIO program, but we see that not all the programs, all the students get all that information when they're in high school. So by the time they get to college, they lack on that information. So we see that the dropout of the numbers of students dropping out of college because they feel they don't have that support when they decide to go back to school. I also we have interviews from schools with that. Like I said, some students, and then they interview some of professionals in the campus, whether it be the WIT, Western Iowa Community College, some of the counselors at high schools, counselors, and Briarcliff, some admissions workers there that express that once they are in campus, they try to get as much information spread around for the students to continue in college, but they see that parents are they don't have as much of information. Like I said, for FAFSA, they are afraid of giving a lot of information because maybe at the legal status, whether it be the student, if it is a DACA student, or if the parents don't have the legal documentation. So like FAFSA and things like that, parents are not having a lot of information in those type of services, and maybe the information is not in their language. So that also it's some of the things that they are working, and then we found out that not all the information is in their own language. So I turn that to Myra.
Myra, 2-minute warning.
So we did interview a total of 13 people, and 8 of those people were students. So through our interviews, we did notice a few common themes, which we have in the front. One of the themes was that Latinx families still want their youth and their children to go on to education. It's very important in the family. And according to Abby Cortez, who's an assistant in the admissions office, she mentioned that the Latinx youth were more enthusiastic about attending college than in the past. Secondly, with the Latinx youth, they had some difficulty learning about college from their family, and that has to do because usually with the Latinx families, there's limited education background, so they're lacking in information in that area, and they're unable to help the Latinx youth. Another theme was that the students stated that they weren't receiving as much preparedness in high school for post-secondary education. So a lot of the information that they got, they were figuring it out on their own. And that was a little problematic because they were experiencing some barriers with understanding things like entrance exams, scholarship applications, college visits. And another common thing we found was that they stated that bilingual advisors were a great asset to them. Then Latinx post-secondary students desired to attend colleges close to home and also to avoid student debt. Some of these families weren't able to assist, is that a timer? Weren't able to assist the students with paying for college. So that was another barrier that we came across.
Okay, I'm sorry, your time is up. Sorry, your time is up. But you can scroll down in your screen and then people can look at that while they ask you questions, okay? And provide some feedback. Just while everybody's considering that, I want to tell you part of the reason for this 10-minute limit is because there's 6 groups, there's that, but also because very often in macro settings, you're not going to have more than 10 minutes. And so it's good to have practice squeezing a lot of information so you focus it into a small box, okay? So if it causes you stress or frustration, that's totally understandable. And it's a good place to start learning how to do it a little differently or do it, just recognize that's going to be a thing. So, okay, any questions or feedback for this group?
I just have one, and maybe it's just my own lack of memory, but at the very beginning you had talked about like the different percentages within the different ethnic backgrounds. Was that related just to Buena Vista County, or was that overall?
Yeah, those were statistics for specific to BV County.
Okay. Great, because that was going to be my question, because just seeing the difference between, Caucasian group and they're, going to college, getting in what they're, if they're all in the same school, getting the same format of teaching, are they examining what is it that those within the Hispanic or, Latina background, what they're not getting? I mean, I just didn't know if testing was being done or why that was.
I don't think at this point anybody has taken serious notice of it. Mm-hmm. So nothing is being done officially about it. But I think everybody has that question. It's just nobody has thought to do any research on it yet.
Right.
I had a question, whether or not you guys found anything in the community that is currently available to assist with like the FAFSA process. I know that you mentioned briefly about bilingual advisors being an asset in some situations, but how readily available is that?
I can answer that. Can you hear me?
Yes, Jill.
We interviewed 2 people who were part of what's called a CAMP grant. And that is a grant through the Department of Education, through the University of Kansas, then through Western Iowa Tech, serving students that are from Buena Vista County. And it is targeted for migrant workers and their children who aspire to access some type of post-secondary education. And within that program, there is a bilingual advisor, and she is very focused on keeping very, very close tabs of these students and their families, and communicating with both the families and the students. And it seems as though there's a positive effect on retention and performance of those students because they have that sense of connection. Because what is often found with these students in institutions of higher ed is they have this lack of belonging, this feeling of being a bit disconnected, and therefore not truly dialing into the material, and that can also threaten persistence. So one of the main things we found is there are lots of programs up there and out there to try to address the issue of equal access to education. Like, how do we get the FAFSA application in front of all racial groups, right? In front of all socioeconomic groups. You know, that's an access point. But where we are lacking is in equity-based programs, specific programs targeted for students in our study of Latinx heritage that need specific and specialized intensified support throughout the whole educational experience that isn't offered to everybody else. So it seems that equity-based programs would be particularly helpful in the persistence and the achievement, because that comes after access. And it's arguably maybe more important because that's where you get the outcome of education attainment.
And as far as availability of bilingual advisors, they are few and far between. And I think they're more exposed to bilingual advisors once they go into post-secondary education. But even then, there's not very many, which is, that's one of the things that we would like to see more of, because it shows that it does help.
Well, and also,
go ahead,
sorry.
Hannah. Go ahead, Hannah, and then Maddie's got a question for you.
Okay. Going off what Jill said about having an access point versus attainment and achievement, when we're talking about bachelor's degrees getting you into the middle class tier of socioeconomic status, so many of these children of immigrants don't have that middle class status, and so they're funneled into lower funded and lower performing K through 12 schools, and then they might not get the advising, the resources that they need until their senior year of high school, and by then it might just be too late. And they don't qualify, or they haven't taken the courses that they needed to take a year ago in order to get into this specific program. So you got to kind of come at it at all directions, and that's what we talked about in our last point. Was we were coming at it from a micro perspective, but really this needs to be addressed at the micro, meso, and macro perspective.
So how do you guys think it affects your data that you have a 2-year institution and a 4-year institution within the county? If it, versus a county that only has a 2-year, or a county that doesn't have any at all?
I think because we do have more schools in our county, there is definitely more access to post-secondary education, where there wouldn't be in counties where there aren't. And our schools actually work really closely with the high school to achieve that, getting students into the schools. So I think that's really important to know, because we do have more students who have access to post-secondary education in BV County. But even then, what we noticed were that the statistics still showed that minorities are going to two-year colleges at a higher rate than any other group, and they're going to four-year colleges at a lower rate than any other minority group or any other racial group as well. So we're still trying to figure that out.
And we also defined post-secondary education as apprenticeships, associate's degrees, bachelor's degrees, or higher. We wanted to look at the whole scope of it because there is this new push at the federal level and at the state level regarding educational funding to go into these apprenticeship programs. And apprenticeship programs, if done well, can elevate a person, and I don't mean elevate as in better, just put them in the middle class socioeconomically, not status-wise necessarily by education, but socioeconomically. And they also have the potential to revitalize local economies. And we wanted to really kind of look at that instead of, a common past experience is anything below a bachelor's degree is subpar, or this minority tracking. That's historically been the case. So is apprenticeships, is that also tracking and subpar, or is it not quite that? Does it have pieces and parts to revitalize economies and to give people socioeconomic stability that would be different than what we've seen in the past with that type of a certificate, diploma, associate's degree? So we wanted to look at all aspects of post-secondary education.
Okay. One of the things, and you all have to decide in your next phase what intervention or interventions you're going to recommend. But one of the things that can happen in this kind of work is shaping interventions that you feel are coming out of the gate anyway. If there is political or other pressure or momentum to have something happen, if it's going to happen, how is it going to happen? So that's also a strategic opportunity or choice that you all might have depending on where you want to take this next iteration of your project. I also want to do a little notice. Hannah, I don't know if you did this on purpose, but you gave a great example of how if you can't get everything into your presentation because you run out of time, you can use the question and answer section of the time to bring up stuff that you didn't get a chance to present. So that is a great trick to put in your back pocket, everyone. And I'm not calling it out as in, that's shady. I'm calling it out because that's smart. Okay, so that's a good thing to keep handy. We've got time for one more short question and answer, and then we have to move on to the next group, if there is another one. Good conversation so far. Okay, nicely done. Very good, second group. Okay, now the trick is going to be to pace ourselves so that we have just as much energy for the last group, right? Because they deserve just as much. It's just their roll of the dice, literally. Because what I did is I rolled a dice, and then I went, and then went from there. So we don't want to short them on energy. We're going to go to the next group, which is technically group number 6, maternal health, correct? And that is Renessa. Let me make sure I've got this right. Renessa, Maddie, Yabi, and Ashley. Yes? Okay. Fabulous.
Well,
Julia?